with Ari, and we're your hosts for the Merry Writer podcast. This week, we're on episode 266, and we're asking which draft is the hardest to write. Before we start, if you enjoy the show, consider checking out our coffee page. You can follow the page for free, as we have plenty of goodies for everyone. If you're feeling generous, a one-off donation will get you access to some treats, or you can become a Merry Writer for just $2 a month. And for that, you'll get access to all the items in our shop, including exclusive goodies, as well as access to monthly bonuses, and it all helps to support our podcast. But of course, if that's not your style and you still enjoy the show, then please subscribe wherever you're listening if you're not already. And if you're listening on YouTube, consider dropping us a like. So which draft is the hardest to write? I think it's kind of obvious that we all write multiple drafts of our manuscripts. We don't just write the one first draft and then self-publish it. Oh, maybe some people do. I don't really know. But obviously this answer is going to be different for everybody. We never know just how many drafts a book is going to take. One project might take 5 drafts, while another may only need, 3 before heading out to betas and or editors. Now, for me, I think writing the second draft is the hardest. Writing the first draft can be difficult in its own way, but the point of it is to tell yourself the story. So you don't have to worry about adding filler or continuously write until something clicks into place. If you don't know what to name the coffee shop, your manuscript. If you don't know what to name the coffee shop your main character frequents, just label it as coffee shop. Put it in bold, highlight it, whatever, and then you can figure out the name later. No biggie. So upon writing draft 1, I print it out, I read it, and then I start revising and making notes. And when that's done, I begin rewriting it as draft 2, and that's when I get stuck a lot. I realize just how much research I need to do, just how much math I need to do for the stupid timelines, how bad the pacing is, why the contents of chapter 7 even exist. Chapter 3 should actually be chapter 5, and so on and so forth. It's a lot of brain power. I'm not just rewriting draft 1, I'm rethinking my life's choices. And as I go through those edits, I'm researching and fact-checking and doing this and that, and it's time-consuming and sometimes just plain old tedious. And by the time I get to draft 3, things are actually much easier because I have most everything figured out. I came up with a name for that coffee shop. I rearranged some chapters to fix the pacing while I was working on draft 2. And of course, there's always going to still be more to fix, but I have the bulk of it, or, I should have the bulk of it figured out during that second draft. So basically, draft 2 is like my first round of developmental editing. I'm looking at the big picture and I'm going through everything with a fine-tooth comb. So yeah, it's the hardest because it requires the most work. As for the easiest, draft 1 is the easiest most of the time for me. And then I just throw myself to the wolves for draft 2, being the most difficult. And then each draft after that becomes a little easier, provided I don't write myself into a hole.
Like that. I think that makes sense. That makes sense. I don't agree.
Of course not. Why would you agree?
If we always agreed, it would be a weird podcast. It'd just be us going, yes, I agree. Yes, I concur, which we do, but not often.
Be a lot easier to edit, though.
That would be a lot easier to edit. Maybe I should just go, I agree. End of
just start
episode.
Lying. We're just going to start lying on these episodes.
Are you saying we don't lie? We're giving great advice that we don't take. We lie.
I can't recall if there's ever a time that I've lied on the podcast. I probably have at one point or another. I'm not going to lie about that. I probably have lied at one point.
Of course, that could be the lie because you haven't.
But I said it wasn't a lie.
Oh,
you got to choose what you want to believe. I know.
I believe this. Anyway, right, what am I doing? Right, mine. Okay. I don't agree. For me, obviously, it's all personal. Draft 1 is my hardest. So while you are in that kind of fun stage, you're telling yourself the story, it's like excitement of building the world and everything, it's still a lot. And I think of it like you're building the house, you're putting in the foundations and your bricks, sorting up the bricks, and you're making holes for the windows and the doors and everything. So it is the most important, and you've got to hit those structural points correctly. I say that as someone who doesn't always manage it. And I think it's because of the way I write, because I don't write linearly, because I always have that weird part of my outline that kind of fades in the third quarter, and I just kind of wing it, which is not good. I often don't just write the first draft like a lot of people. You know, like they just get it all down. I'm 100% with you with like if you don't know a name of something, or if I'm not in the mood to describe the castle or the forest, I'll just put description here. I'm all for that. I love my placeholders. But I don't like fixing structural issues later. I just don't. It's just not in my nature to fix big structural issues. I kind of need to get them as close to the right as possible because I'm a bad person and I write and edit at the same time. And I know I'm not supposed to do that, but I can't stop myself. I try. I do have moments where I don't. So my first draft is a lot of tweaking and fixing and trying to get those foundations right. Once I've got draft one done and all the other drafts, it's more the smaller fixes, you know, it's like you're decorating and you're cleaning the windows and you may be sticking an extension on. So sometimes that can be a bit awkward, but the whole house is kind of right. Unless it's the worst happens and I have to turn the whole thing down and start again. I thankfully don't do rewrites very often these days because I don't like them. I just don't. I try not to. I think that's why I do what I do with draft one, because I hate rewrites, like full on start from scratch rewriting a novel. I just can't do it. I've done it a lot when I was younger and I don't like it, so I just don't do it. And the problem is the fun I get from the draft one of telling the story, it gets a little frustrating when you're hitting plot points that are not threaded right, or you're hitting structural issues that don't connect, and you're not getting that nice smooth character arc, that nice smooth plot arc. And I do all my stressing and cursing in draft one. Same as you though, when I finish, I will print it out. I always print it. I usually do a quick run through on the computer, but you need to do an edit off screen, don't you? And then I'll run through and I'll pick up things. And that's when all the questions, because I use it in draft one, I get questions created. Draft two is where I start answering questions, unless they're really big questions, and then I try and ignore them and hope they go away on their own. Don't. And things like that. But yeah, the first draft, I struggle to get the first draft completed. And I think that's a mix of imposter syndrome, perfectionism, and just being an idiot with how I don't complete my outline in the middle for some reason. And I just kind of, and also, I don't know about you, but I am horrifically bad at coming up with new ideas while I'm in the trenches of writing. And then I'm like, oh, I'm going to wedge that in. And it's like, no, take a breath, go back to your outline and figure it out. Like, no, I'm just going to wedge it in. I've got a crowbar here. I'm just going to shove it in and then I'll work around it. This is why I've really got a problem with first drafts. I'm starting to have that epiphany moment.
Okay, I'm gonna use your building a house analogy for a second here. It's really interesting how you work. You build the foundation and you make it perfect, and you make sure that it's smooth and there are absolutely no cracks, no bubbles, nothing, which is how a foundation should be for a house. I think we can all agree on that. It shouldn't have any cracks. Whereas I build that foundation and I miss a spot and I'm like, I'll get back to that later. No biggie.
I can patch that. It's fine. We'll cover it up. No one will see.
It's fine. No, it's not a big deal. So I do find that really interesting. And I agree with that. I do agree with that to a certain extent, because when you're writing the first draft, yeah, you do want it to be as perfect as possible because you are telling yourself the story. So you want to cover all your bases. You want to make sure that you're telling yourself the full story so that you don't accidentally write yourself into a hole later. Probably writing draft one used to be my hardest when I outlined before writing. And I do outline a lot. I am a planner and I will have like a basic outline. But when I first started writing novels, my outlines looked like, chapter one, this happens. Chapter two, that happens. And it would be a bulleted list of a summary for every single chapter, every single scene. And I would write draft one and I would try to stick to that. And then as I came up with more ideas and new things, I got stuck because I was like, well, I can't diverge from my outline. And then as I got older and I learned more about writing and I improved my craft and things like that, I realized outlines are more like guidelines. And yeah, that's an almost direct quote from Pirates of the Caribbean, because I realized I don't have to stick with this to its to like a specific point. I can just write down my thoughts, and if it makes it in, great. If it doesn't, it might make it in later. Oh well. So now usually when I write the first draft, I just tell myself the story and I write the outline as I write draft one. And I say, this happened, but in a note in the margin, this could also happen. And maybe it will in draft two. Maybe it'll happen in draft five. Maybe it'll be in the next book. Maybe I realize it doesn't fit at all. So I kind of made draft one easier for me because I stopped outlining before writing. I would have like my basic idea written, and then I would outline, and like basically my outline is what is currently happening in the story rather than what I want to happen in the story.
That makes sense. I find it weird because, like, other than the stupid part in the middle of my outlines have got bigger and more crazier. Like, some of them have turned into like 32,000 words, and it's an outline. It's like, that could have been the whole book. I might as well just left it. But I can't do it. It's weird. I can never do bullet points for outlines anymore. I used to be able to, but now I write in like chunky sentences, like, and just explain the scene. And sometimes I'll throw in dialogue if I've got dialogue in my head. I'm like, this, there they are. And there could be like 3 pages of just dialogue. And then at the end, I'll just take it out of the outline and plop it in and then tidy it up because, like, well, I already wrote that. But yeah, it's so weird that we all do it a different way, and whatever works for you work, you know, because I know so many people who can just write the first draft and it's like clean. Not talking perfect, I'm talking just it's done. They've written it out and it's messy and there's errors, but it's, you know, they didn't go back and check anything. They put the placeholders in and they just carried on from the first chapter to the end chapter, and then they can go back and it's a nice, you know, it's a nice structure that they're going to build on. And it's like the idea of not going back and looking at earlier chapters and checking things and, you know, oh, does that work? Does that, you know, I do a lot of the stuff like the fact checking. I do that in chapter one. I do that in draft one while I'm faffing. I don't do all of it. Sometimes I'm like, okay, you need to stop now. So I'll put a note saying, need to fact check this, need to research this. But so many times I do it while I'm writing. And it's so hard to stop myself from doing that. I would love to have that ability to just write draft one, you know, sit down, write as many words as I can each day and just go from chapter one to the end. No meandering around, no stopping to check. What's a better word for that? You can sort that later, but I can't. I will just have thesaurus.com open and just spend most of my time in it going, don't know a better word for that. I need a better word for that. Literally the only thing I have up most of the time. It's so bad.
I will do that too, though. During my first draft, I will have word hippo up all the time, and I will constantly be like changing up my vocabulary and things like that. And there are little things that like I'll edit as I write, but for the most part, that's why I started keeping a list, because I found myself not writing most of the time while writing the first draft. I would just be doing more research and fact checking and this, that, and the other. And then 9 times out of 10, it would either get cut or something would change. And then I'd have to redo the research because I decided to change some random thing and now it's different. So I just decided that I keep that separate list of editing notes. And I have my outline so that if I need to find something later, I can look in my outline and say, oh, that happened in chapter 12. So I can go check chapter 12 and fix that real quick. And then I have the editing notes that tells me what I need to research. And yeah, I mean, every once in a while I get distracted during the first draft process and I'll research what I need to research because sometimes the words just aren't there. So I need to do something else for the book to make me feel productive. But yeah, I tend to just leave it all for draft 2 so that I can just say I have a completed manuscript. Well, not completed, but yeah, you know what I mean. So yeah, I don't think we can really talk anymore about this. That's just a little insight on how Ari and I write. And apparently the first draft is hardest for Ari and the second draft is hardest for me. And ironically enough, the first draft seems to be the easiest. What's the easiest draft for you then? Do you have one?
Probably the last draft when it's just tweaking little bits. When I feel, I know it sounds sick, it's like, is there a last draft? You know, we're writers that we're always tweaking, but when everything feels mostly okay, and I'm like taking a comma out and then putting it back in, then taking it out and putting it back in, when I realize, okay, I'm probably okay now. It's fine. I can let it go to somebody else to read and find all the errors I didn't realize. Things like that.
Oh, that makes sense. That makes sense. When you're reading that final draft, but you don't know it's the final draft, makes it all the more satisfying. So that is understandable. But yeah, there we have it. There's a little insight into our writing processes and our drafts. A little bit of a different episode this week, but hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Before we leave, if you're new here and you want to learn more about the podcast and opportunities to be a guest on the show and just us in general, you can check out our website at themerrywriterpodcast.podbean.com. In the meantime, we'll turn it over to you guys. Which draft do you struggle with the most? And also, which draft is the easiest for you guys to write? Let us know your answers in the comments and we'll chat about it. Remember, we release a new episode every Wednesday. Next week, we're interviewing another special guest. So to ensure you don't miss it, don't forget to hit the subscribe button on your way out. As always, thank you for listening to the Merry Writer Podcast. We'll see you guys next week. This podcast is brought to you by Excessive Caffeine. We drink a lot. The music titled Inspired is by Kevin MacLeod, licensed under Creative Commons 4.0.